Victoria Sterling checked her watch as she walked through the Denver International Airport terminal, her 12-year-old son Marcus keeping pace beside her. 8 minutes. That's all it would take once she made the call. 8 minutes to change everything for the crew aboard Flight 447 to Miami. But first, she had to endure what was about to happen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on her that she owned a controlling stake in Pacific Airways, the very airline whose first-class cabin she was about to enter. For the past 5 years, Victoria had served as the silent majority shareholder, preferring to let her management team run operations while she focused on her primary business, Sterling Global Logistics, one of the largest freight and shipping companies in North America. Victoria Sterling hadn't always been wealthy. Born Victoria Washington in a modest neighborhood in Detroit, she had clawed her way up from a teenage mother working 3 jobs to put herself through community college. When Marcus was born when she was just 19, people told her to give up her dreams of business school. Instead, she worked nights at a shipping warehouse while studying during the day, her infant son sleeping in a carrier beside her textbooks. Her breakthrough came at 25 when she identified a massive inefficiency in how freight companies coordinated with airlines. While working as a logistics coordinator, she noticed that cargo planes often flew half-empty while freight companies paid premium rates for ground transportation. With $2,000 in savings and a business plan she'd written during her lunch breaks, Victoria approached small freight companies with a revolutionary idea: coordinated air-ground shipping networks that could cut delivery times in half. The first year was brutal. Victoria cold-called companies from her studio apartment while Marcus played quietly in the corner, surviving on ramen noodles and determination. Her big break came when a major electronics manufacturer desperately needed to transport sensitive components from Seattle to Miami within 24 hours. Traditional shipping would take 3 days. Victoria coordinated with 4 different carriers, including a small regional airline, to move the cargo in 18 hours. The satisfied client gave her a $50,000 contract on the spot. Sterling Global Logistics grew methodically over the next decade. Victoria reinvested every profit, expanding her network of partnerships with airlines, trucking companies, and shipping lines. She developed proprietary software that optimized multimodal transportation routes, cutting costs for clients while reducing environmental impact. By the time Marcus turned 10, Victoria's company was handling logistics for Fortune 500 companies across the continent. The acquisition of Pacific Airways had been strategic, not emotional. The regional airline was struggling financially but had valuable routes and slots at major airports. Victoria saw an opportunity to vertically integrate her shipping business while saving a company that employed over 3,000 people. She purchased 60% of the airline through a holding company, keeping her identity as the owner private, to avoid complications with competitors and regulatory scrutiny. Most Pacific Airways employees had no idea that the woman walking through Denver's terminal was their ultimate boss. Victoria preferred it that way. She believed in leading from behind, letting her management teams operate independently while she focused on strategic vision. The quarterly board meetings were her only direct involvement in airline operations, and even then, she participated via video conference from her Seattle headquarters. Marcus Sterling Washington was everything Victoria could have hoped for in a son. Intelligent, curious, and compassionate, he had inherited his mother's analytical mind and natural leadership qualities. At 12, he was already excelling in advanced mathematics and had just been accepted into a prestigious summer program for gifted students at MIT. The trip to Miami was meant to be a celebration, a mother-son vacation before Marcus started high school early in the fall. Victoria had deliberately chosen to fly Pacific Airways for this trip, curious to experience her airline from a passenger's perspective. She had booked first-class tickets under her personal name, not her business identity, wanting an authentic customer experience. Her personal assistant had made the reservations using Victoria's maiden name, Washington, rather than her business name Sterling, to ensure complete anonymity. The decision to travel incognito would prove fateful. Without the protection of her corporate identity, Victoria would experience firsthand a discrimination that she had unknowingly allowed to persist within her own company. The irony was stark. The woman who could fire every employee on the flight with a single phone call was about to be treated as if she didn't belong in the cabin she ultimately owned. Marcus had been excited about flying first class for the first time. During the taxi ride to the airport, he peppered his mother with questions about the amenities, the meal service, and whether they really gave you real silverware instead of plastic. Victoria smiled at his enthusiasm, remembering her own first-class flight years ago when a grateful client had upgraded her ticket as a bonus. She wanted Marcus to understand that success brought privileges, but also responsibilities. The boy's excitement was infectious, even among the stress of travel. Victoria had been working 14-hour days, preparing for a major merger between Sterling Global and a European logistics firm. The deal would expand her company's reach across 3 continents and cement her position as one of the most powerful women in international shipping. The Miami trip was supposed to be a much-needed break from negotiations, lawyers, and board meetings. Victoria's success hadn't come without sacrifices. She had never married Marcus's father, a college boyfriend who had disappeared when she told him about the pregnancy. Raising Marcus as a single mother while building a business empire had meant missing school plays, working through family dinners, and spending countless nights on conference calls after tucking him into bed. But she had never regretted her choices. Every sacrifice had been for Marcus's future, to ensure he would never experience the poverty and uncertainty that had defined her own childhood. The Sterling Global headquarters in Seattle employed over 2,000 people directly, with another 10,000 working for subsidiary companies and partner organizations. Victoria's net worth had been estimated by Forbes at $1.2 billion, making her one of the youngest African-American women to achieve billionaire status. Despite her wealth, she lived modestly, driving herself to work in a 5-year-old Toyota and living in the same house she had bought when Marcus was 5. Her philanthropic work focused on education and entrepreneurship programs for single mothers and disadvantaged youth. Through the Sterling Foundation, she had provided business loans to over 500 women-owned startups and funded full college scholarships for 200 students from low-income families. Victoria believed deeply in using her success to create opportunities for others who faced the same barriers she had overcome. The Pacific Airways acquisition had been controversial among her business advisors. Many questioned why she would diversify into such a different industry, especially one known for thin profit margins and operational challenges. Victoria's reasoning was both practical and personal. Practically, owning an airline gave Sterling Global significant leverage in shipping negotiations and access to cargo routes that competitors couldn't match. Personally, she remembered the humiliation of being bumped from flights in her early business days because she couldn't afford flexible tickets, watching while better-dressed passengers kept their seats. Now, as she and Marcus approached the gate for Flight 447, Victoria had no idea that she was about to experience discrimination far worse than anything from her struggling days. The cruel irony was that this time, she had the power to do something about it immediately. The question was whether she would reveal her identity to stop the humiliation or endure it to understand the full scope of problems within her own company. Marcus chatted excitedly beside her as they joined the priority boarding line, his backpack stuffed with books and his tablet loaded with educational games for the flight. He had dressed up for the occasion, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that Victoria had helped him pick out. She wore a simple blazer and slacks, professional but not ostentatious, carrying a leather briefcase that contained not just work documents, but also the private phone number that could reach Pacific Airways' CEO within minutes. The gate area buzzed with typical pre-flight activity. Business travelers typed on laptops, families corralled restless children, and flight attendants moved purposefully between the gate desk and the aircraft door. Victoria observed the scene with the analytical eye that had built her business empire, noting inefficiencies in the boarding process and opportunities for improvement in customer service. She made mental notes for the next board meeting, unaware that this flight would make such concerns seem trivial. As they waited for their boarding group to be called, Victoria reflected on how far she had come from those early days in Detroit. Her mother, who had worked as a hospital cleaner for 30 years, still couldn't quite believe that her daughter owned companies worth billions of dollars. Victoria had bought her mother a house in a safe neighborhood and ensured she would never want for anything, but the older woman still worried that her daughter was working too hard and sacrificing too much. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom, interrupting Victoria's thoughts. First-class passengers were invited to board, and Marcus practically bounced with excitement as they gathered their carry-on bags. Victoria smiled at her son's enthusiasm, remembering her own sense of wonder during those first business trips when her company was just starting to succeed. She wanted Marcus to appreciate these experiences while also understanding the hard work and determination that made them possible. As they approached the gate agent, Victoria handed over their boarding passes with a confident smile. She had no reason to expect anything other than the courteous service that first-class passengers typically received. The tickets were valid, the seats were paid for, and they were dressed appropriately for business travel. She was simply a successful businesswoman traveling with her son, looking forward to a relaxing vacation in Miami. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with carefully styled blonde hair and a practiced smile, took their boarding passes and scanned them into the system. For a moment, everything seemed routine. Then the agent's expression changed, her smile faltering as she looked from the boarding passes to Victoria and Marcus, then back to the passes again. The scanner beeped, confirming that the tickets were valid, but the agent seemed confused by what she was seeing. Victoria noticed the change in demeanor but didn't immediately understand its significance. She had experienced subtle discrimination throughout her business career. The surprised looks when she entered boardrooms, the assumptions that she must be an assistant rather than an executive, the extra scrutiny of her credentials that white colleagues never faced. But she had learned to navigate these microaggressions professionally, focusing on results rather than reactions. Marcus was oblivious to the tension, still excited about the prospect of sitting in the large seats and getting a hot meal on the plane. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking if they could watch a movie together during the flight. Victoria assured him they could, while keeping her attention on the gate agent, who was now typing something into her computer with an expression of growing concern. What Victoria didn't know was that her simple decision to travel under her maiden name was about to trigger a series of assumptions and biases that would expose the deep-seated problems within her own airline. The next few minutes would test everything she believed about leadership, justice, and the responsibility that came with power. And in exactly 8 minutes after she made a single phone call, 3 careers would be over, and an entire flight crew would be searching for new jobs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The gate agent finally looked up from her computer, her professional smile now replaced with barely concealed suspicion. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, and Victoria felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with recognizing discrimination. But this time would be different. This time, she had the power to ensure that justice was swift and complete. Marcus continued to chatter about the flight, unaware that they were about to walk into a situation that would change not just their travel experience, but the entire future of Pacific Airways' customer service policies. His innocence and excitement stood in stark contrast to the storm that was about to unfold, a storm that his mother was uniquely positioned to weather and ultimately control. The gate agent's fingers hovered over her keyboard as she studied Victoria and Marcus with increasing scrutiny. Her nameplate read Jennifer Mills, and she had worked for Pacific Airways for 8 years, long enough to develop what she considered an expert eye for passengers who might be, quote, problematic. In her mind, a black woman and child boarding first class raised immediate red flags. "Ma'am, I need to verify these tickets," Jennifer said, her tone shifting from professional courtesy to bureaucratic authority. "There seems to be some kind of issue with the booking." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issue? The confirmation number is right there, and your scanner just accepted them." Jennifer's computer screen showed exactly what it should. 2 valid first-class tickets purchased with a platinum corporate credit card. Seats 2A and 2B, no flags or warnings in the system. But Jennifer had made assumptions before checking facts, and now she was committed to her suspicions. "Sometimes the system doesn't catch fraudulent bookings right away," Jennifer explained, though this was completely untrue. "I need to call my supervisor to verify the purchase method." Marcus looked up at his mother with confusion. "Mom, is something wrong with our tickets?" "No, sweetheart," Victoria replied calmly, though inside she felt the familiar burn of racial profiling. "The nice lady is just doing her job very thoroughly." Behind them, the first-class boarding line was growing longer. A well-dressed white couple in their 60s stepped forward impatiently. The man wore an expensive watch and carried a leather briefcase monogrammed with RHT. His wife sported designer jewelry and a handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Excuse me," the man said, addressing Jennifer directly while ignoring Victoria entirely. Robert Hamilton Thompson, I fly this route twice a month. Is there some kind of delay? Jennifer's demeanor instantly transformed back to effusive hospitality. Oh, Mr. Thompson, so wonderful to see you again. Just a small verification issue with these passengers. I'll have you boarded in just a moment. The contrast in treatment was stark and intentional. Victoria watched as Jennifer processed the Thompsons' tickets in under 30 seconds, barely glancing at their identification despite having never asked Victoria for hers. The couple moved past them toward the jet bridge, Mrs. Thompson shooting a disapproving look at Victoria and Marcus as if their presence somehow diminished her own status. Now then, Jennifer continued, turning back to Victoria with renewed authority. I'm going to need to see photo identification for both you and the child, plus a credit card matching the name on the booking. Victoria's jaw tightened. She had traveled extensively for business and knew this was not standard procedure. I'd be happy to provide my ID, but my son doesn't carry a driver's license. He's 12 years old. All passengers require photo identification, Jennifer insisted, though this was another fabrication. Perhaps a school ID? Marcus dug through his backpack and produced his student ID from the private academy he attended. Jennifer examined it as if it were a suspicious document, comparing the photo to Marcus's face multiple times. The ID clearly showed his name as Marcus Sterling Washington and identified him as an 8th grade honor student. This doesn't match the name on the boarding pass, Jennifer announced triumphantly. The boarding pass showed M. Washington, while the ID showed his full hyphenated name. Victoria's patience was wearing thin. It's the same person. M. Washington is obviously short for Marcus Washington. The hyphenated name is from his school registration. Jennifer shook her head with exaggerated authority. I'm sorry, but the names must match exactly. This appears to be a case of ticket fraud. The accusation of fraud was so outrageous that Victoria almost laughed. She was being accused of stealing tickets to board her own airline. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so insulting and harmful to Marcus, who was beginning to understand that they were being treated differently than other passengers. Ma'am, Victoria said, her voice taking on the steel that had intimidated CEOs and board members across 3 continents. I need you to call your supervisor immediately. This is completely unacceptable. Jennifer's eyes flashed with defiance. In her experience, passengers who complained loudly were usually the ones trying to get away with something. My supervisor is very busy. If you'd like to resolve this quickly, I can rebook you in economy where there are several seats available. The suggestion that they should accept lesser accommodations to avoid further scrutiny was the final straw. Victoria pulled out her phone and checked the time. She could end this immediately with a single phone call to Pacific Airways CEO David Chen. But something held her back. This was clearly not an isolated incident, and she needed to understand the full scope of how her employees were treating black passengers. Behind them, more first-class passengers were boarding smoothly. A young white couple with 3 small children passed through without any request for identification beyond their boarding passes. An elderly black minister traveling alone was pulled aside for additional verification, his tickets scrutinized for several minutes before he was reluctantly allowed to board. Victoria noticed the pattern and realized she was witnessing systematic discrimination, not just personal bias from one employee. This was a training issue, a culture issue, potentially a company-wide problem that her management team had either hidden from her or failed to address adequately. Marcus tugged at her sleeve. Mom, why is this taking so long? The plane is going to leave without us. Before Victoria could answer, a flight attendant emerged from the jet bridge. Sharon Mitchell had worked for Pacific Airways for 15 years and had developed what she considered a professional eye for passengers who might cause trouble. Seeing the extended delay with Victoria and Marcus, she approached to assist her colleague. Jennifer, is there a problem here? Sharon asked, though her tone suggested she had already decided where the problem lay. These passengers have questionable tickets, Jennifer explained. The names don't match their identification, and I'm concerned about potential fraud. Sharon examined Victoria and Marcus with the same suspicious scrutiny, taking in their appearance and making the same racial assumptions that had guided Jennifer's behavior. Ma'am, do you have any other documentation that might help us verify your identity, perhaps a company ID or business card? Victoria realized this was a test. If she produced her Sterling Global business card, the discrimination would likely stop immediately. But she would never know how far her employees were willing to take their bias, and other passengers without her resources would continue to face the same treatment. "I'm a paying passenger with valid tickets," Victoria replied evenly. "I shouldn't need to prove my worthiness to board this aircraft." Sharon's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we have security protocols that all passengers must follow. If you're unwilling to cooperate, we may need to involve airport security." The threat was both hollow and revealing. Victoria knew airline security protocols backward and forward from her ownership position. Nothing they were demanding was required by actual policy, but they were confident enough in their authority to threaten police involvement. Marcus was becoming increasingly distressed by the confrontation. At 12, he was old enough to understand that they were being treated unfairly, but too young to fully comprehend the racial dynamics at play. He pressed closer to his mother, his earlier excitement about the flight completely evaporated. "Why are they being mean to us, Mom?" he whispered. The question pierced Victoria's heart. She had worked her entire life to shield Marcus from the worst aspects of racism, enrolling him in diverse private schools and ensuring he grew up in environments where his intelligence and character were valued above his skin color. But here, in her own airline, her son was learning that success and wealth meant nothing if prejudiced people decided you didn't belong. Victoria pulled out her Platinum American Express card, the one tied to her personal account that regularly handled six-figure business expenses. "Here's the credit card used for the purchase. You can verify the transaction." Jennifer took the card reluctantly, having hoped Victoria would simply give up and accept the economy seats. The card was obviously legitimate, with Victoria's name embossed clearly on the front. But instead of resolving the issue, Jennifer found new objections. "This card shows Victoria Washington, but the tickets were purchased under V. Washington. How do I know you didn't steal this card?" This suggestion that she was a credit card thief was so absurd that Victoria almost revealed her identity on the spot. The woman accusing her of theft was an employee of a company Victoria could purchase outright with a phone call to her investment banker. But she maintained her composure, recognizing that this experience was teaching her valuable lessons about her own business. "Run the card," Victoria said simply. "If it's stolen, the transaction will be declined." Sharon intervened before Jennifer could comply. "Ma'am, we don't run credit cards at the gate. If there's been a mistake with your booking, you'll need to visit the ticket counter to resolve it." The suggestion that they leave the gate area and start over was designed to make them miss their flight. It was a tactic Sharon had used before, with passengers she deemed undesirable, knowing that most people would accept the inconvenience rather than cause a scene. Victoria checked her watch again. The boarding process was nearly complete, and they were running out of time. She could see other passengers watching the confrontation with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. Some seemed sympathetic, others appeared to agree with the airline employee's suspicions. An older white woman waiting in the general boarding area approached the desk. "Excuse me," she said to Jennifer, "but I couldn't help noticing this situation. That woman and her son have been standing here for 20 minutes while everyone else boards quickly. This seems highly unusual." The woman's intervention surprised everyone. Victoria had expected either indifference or additional hostility from other passengers, not support. The woman, who appeared to be in her 70s, carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. "Ma'am, please step back," Sharon instructed. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," the woman replied firmly. "I'm watching what appears to be clear discrimination, and as a fellow passenger, I find it deeply disturbing. I've been flying for 40 years, and I've never seen first-class passengers subjected to this level of scrutiny." Jennifer and Sharon exchanged glances, realizing that their behavior was attracting unwanted attention. Other passengers were beginning to notice the delay and the confrontational tone of the conversation. Victoria felt a surge of gratitude toward the stranger who had chosen to speak up. It reminded her that not everyone was complicit in discrimination, and that sometimes allies appeared in unexpected moments. "The lady is absolutely right," Victoria said, addressing both airline employees. "You've been questioning my tickets for 20 minutes, while processing dozens of other passengers in seconds. Either board us now or I want to speak with your duty manager immediately." The demand for a manager was exactly what Sharon had hoped to avoid. Duty managers had actual authority and knowledge of company policies and would quickly recognize that Victoria and Marcus were being treated illegally. But with multiple passengers now watching and the boarding process nearly complete, she had little choice. "I'll call the duty manager," Sharon said reluctantly, reaching for her radio. "But I want you to know that this kind of disruption is exactly why we have security protocols." Victoria smiled grimly. In about 5 minutes, Sharon would discover just how much disruption an upset airline owner could create. The duty manager was about to receive a lesson in customer service that would reshape Pacific Airways training programs forever. Marcus looked up at his mother with a mixture of confusion and admiration. "Mom, are you going to get us in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Victoria replied, pulling him close. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." The duty manager who responded to Sharon's radio call was Kevin Rodriguez, a 10-year veteran of Pacific Airways who prided himself on handling difficult situations with calm professionalism. As he approached the gate desk, he could see the tension radiating from both the airline employees and the delayed passengers. What he couldn't see was that he was about to interact with the woman who ultimately controlled his employment future. "Good afternoon," Kevin said, his tone measured and diplomatic. "I understand there's been some confusion with boarding passes. How can I help resolve this?" Sharon immediately launched into her version of events, painting Victoria and Marcus as uncooperative passengers with questionable documentation. "These passengers refuse to provide adequate identification, and we have concerns about ticket fraud. The names don't match their IDs, and they've been argumentative when we've tried to follow standard security protocols." Kevin turned to Victoria with a professional smile, though she noticed his eyes quickly assessed her appearance and made the same unconscious calculations that had guided his colleague's behavior. "Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience. Would you mind showing me your boarding passes and identification so we can sort this out quickly?" Victoria handed over the documents again, watching Kevin's face as he examined them. Unlike Jennifer and Sharon, he actually knew the policies and could see immediately that the tickets were legitimate, and the identification was perfectly acceptable. The slight frown that crossed his features told her he recognized his employees had overstepped their authority. "Mrs. Washington," Kevin said carefully, "I can see that your tickets are valid and properly purchased. However, my staff has expressed some concerns about the name discrepancy with your son's identification." "Which concerns are completely unfounded," Victoria replied. "M. Washington and Marcus Sterling Washington are obviously the same person. Any reasonable person can see that." Kevin nodded slowly, recognizing the validity of her point, but he also understood the position his employees had put him in. Admitting they were wrong would require acknowledging discriminatory behavior, while supporting them would mean continuing an unjustifiable delay. "I understand your frustration," he said, choosing his words carefully. "In the interest of getting everyone boarded quickly, perhaps we could upgrade you to our business class cabin, which has excellent amenities and—" "Absolutely not," Victoria interrupted, her voice carrying the authority that had built a billion-dollar empire. "We paid for first-class seats, and that's where we'll be sitting. I'm not accepting a downgrade because your employees decided to profile us." The word profile hung in the air like an accusation. Kevin realized that this situation was escalating beyond a simple customer service issue into potential discrimination claims and legal liability. He could feel other passengers watching, and several had their phones out, clearly recording the interaction. Marcus tugged at his mother's jacket. "Mom, maybe we should just take the other seats. I don't care where we sit." Victoria's heart broke at her son's willingness to accept lesser treatment to avoid conflict. This was exactly the lesson she didn't want him to learn, that he should diminish his expectations to make others comfortable with his presence. "No, Marcus," she said firmly but gently. "We belong in the seats we paid for, and we're not moving." The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier approached the group again. "Young man," she said to Kevin, "I've been watching this entire interaction. These passengers have done nothing wrong, and your staff has treated them shamefully. If this airline thinks it can discriminate against customers based on race, you're going to find yourselves in serious legal trouble." Kevin's face flushed red. The situation was becoming exactly the kind of public relations nightmare that airlines worked desperately to avoid. Social media had made it impossible to handle discrimination quietly, and he could see several passengers actively filming the confrontation. "Ma'am, I assure you that Pacific Airways does not discriminate," he said, though his words sounded hollow even to himself. "We're simply following security protocols to ensure all passengers' safety." What security protocols require examining one family's tickets for 30 minutes while processing everyone else in 30 seconds, the elderly woman demanded. I'm Martha Henderson, and I've been flying since before you were born. This is discrimination, pure and simple. Victoria filed away Martha Henderson's name, making a mental note to thank her properly once this ordeal was over. The woman's willingness to speak up was exactly the kind of moral courage that Victoria tried to instill in Marcus, and she was grateful that her son was witnessing someone stand up for what was right. Meanwhile, aboard the aircraft, lead flight attendant Brian Foster was growing impatient with the delay. He had worked the Denver-Miami route for 5 years and prided himself on on-time departures. The extended boarding delay was throwing off his entire service timeline, and he decided to investigate personally. Brian emerged from the jet bridge with the confident stride of someone accustomed to resolving passenger disputes quickly and decisively. At 38, he had seen every type of difficult passenger and believed he could handle any situation. What he didn't know was that the difficult passenger he was about to confront could terminate his employment with a single phone call. "Kevin, what's the holdup?" Brian asked, surveying the scene with practiced authority. "We're past our scheduled departure time." "These passengers are having some documentation issues," Kevin explained, though he was beginning to realize how weak his position had become. Brian looked at Victoria and Marcus, and his expression immediately hardened. In his mind, he saw exactly what his colleagues had seen: 2 black passengers in first class, who probably didn't belong there. Without examining any evidence, he made the same prejudiced assumptions that had guided the entire confrontation. "Ma'am, I need you to understand that we have a schedule to maintain," Brian said, his tone carrying the implicit threat of removal from the flight. "If you can't resolve this documentation issue quickly, we'll need to find alternative arrangements for your travel." Victoria's patience finally snapped. She had endured 40 minutes of discrimination, watched her son become distressed and confused, and listened to repeated threats and ultimatums from employees of her own company. The irony of being threatened with removal from her own airline had moved from painful to absurd. "Alternative arrangements?" she repeated, her voice deadly calm. "The only arrangements that need to be made are for new employment for your staff." Brian bristled at what he perceived as a threat from a passenger he had already dismissed as unimportant. "Ma'am, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to call airport security." "Please do," Victoria replied, pulling out her phone. "In fact, let me save you the trouble." The calm confidence in her voice gave Brian pause, but he was too committed to his assumptions to back down. "Ma'am, put the phone away. You're not allowed to make calls in the boarding area." "Actually, that's not true," Martha Henderson interjected. "There's no prohibition on phone calls in the gate area. Another made-up rule from your staff." Victoria's fingers moved across her phone screen as she navigated to her contacts. The number she was looking for was listed under Pacific CEO Direct. David Chen had no idea he was about to receive a call that would change the trajectory of several careers and reshape his company's training programs. "Ma'am, I'm warning you," Brian said, stepping closer in what he intended as an intimidating gesture. "Put that phone down immediately." Victoria looked up at him with a smile that sent chills down the spines of everyone who knew her in business contexts. It was the smile she wore when competitors underestimated her, when board members questioned her judgment, when anyone made the mistake of thinking she was someone they could push around. "I'm calling my airline," she said simply. The phrasing was deliberately ambiguous, but something in her tone made Kevin, Sharon, Jennifer, and Brian all pause. There was an authority in her voice that none of them had heard before, a confidence that suggested she knew something they didn't. Marcus looked up at his mother with curiosity. He had seen her make business calls before, had watched her command boardrooms and negotiate million-dollar deals. But this was different. There was something in her expression that he had never seen before. Not anger, but a cold determination that promised swift and decisive action. "Mom," he said quietly. "It's okay, sweetheart," Victoria replied, her voice softening as she addressed her son. "Mommy is going to fix this." The phone began to ring, and Victoria stepped slightly away from the group gathered around the gate desk. In Seattle, David Chen was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his personal line rang. He glanced at the caller ID and saw only V. Washington, a name that meant nothing to him. "David Chen," he answered, expecting a routine business call. "David, this is Victoria Sterling," she said, using her business name for the first time that day. "I'm standing at gate B24 in Denver, and I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." David's blood ran cold. Victoria Sterling was not just the majority owner of Pacific Airways. She was one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. The fact that she was calling his direct line from an airport gate could only mean one thing. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with customer service. "Victoria," he said, his voice immediately shifting to crisis management mode. "What's happening?" "Your employees have spent the last 45 minutes discriminating against me and my 12-year-old son," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the gate area. "They've questioned our tickets, demanded unnecessary identification, accused us of fraud, threatened us with security, and suggested we accept downgraded seats to resolve their discomfort with our presence in first class." Kevin, Sharon, Jennifer, and Brian had all stopped talking, focusing intently on Victoria's phone conversation. The pieces were beginning to come together, and the realization of who they had been confronting was dawning with horrifying clarity. "They don't know who I am," Victoria continued, "which means they treat all black passengers this way. I want every employee involved in this incident terminated immediately. I want the flight crew replaced before departure. And I want a complete review of all customer service training programs." David's voice was barely audible, but in the sudden silence of the gate area, everyone could hear his response. "Consider it done. I'm sending security to escort the employees off the property immediately." Victoria ended the call and looked at the 4 airline employees who had just discovered they were no longer employed. The transformation in their expressions was immediate and complete. From arrogant authority to panicked desperation in the span of a single phone conversation. "That was David Chen, CEO of Pacific Airways," Victoria announced to the gathered crowd. "He's agreed that your behavior today was completely unacceptable." Brian was the first to find his voice. "Ma'am, if we had known—" "Known what?" Victoria interrupted. "That you should treat all passengers with respect regardless of their race? That you shouldn't profile customers based on their appearance? That basic human decency applies to everyone?" Jennifer began to cry, realizing that her career in aviation was over. Sharon stared in shocked silence, unable to process the magnitude of her mistake. Kevin pulled out his own phone, hoping he could somehow call his supervisor and explain the situation before word reached the higher levels of management. Marcus watched the scene unfold with wide eyes, beginning to understand that his mother was far more powerful than he had realized. The people who had been mean to them were now scared and apologetic, begging for forgiveness that would not come. 8 minutes, Victoria said, checking her watch. "From the time I made that call to the moment you're escorted from this airport will be exactly 8 minutes. She had kept her promise to herself, though the employees who had discriminated against her had no idea what promise she was referencing. In 8 minutes, their careers would be over, their professional reputations destroyed, and their ability to work in the airline industry permanently damaged. The gate area had grown silent, except for the sound of Jennifer's quiet sobbing and the clicking of phone cameras capturing the dramatic reversal of fortune. Victoria Sterling had revealed herself, and the consequences were about to be swift and absolute. Airport security arrived at Gate B24 within 4 minutes of Victoria's phone call, moving with the urgent efficiency that accompanied high-priority directives from airline executives. Leading the team was Captain James Morrison, a 20-year veteran of Denver International Security Force who had never encountered a situation quite like this one. Captain Morrison approached the gate desk where 4 Pacific Airways employees stood in various states of shock and disbelief. He carried a tablet displaying termination orders that had been transmitted directly from the airline's corporate headquarters, along with instructions to escort the dismissed employees from the premises immediately. "Jennifer Mills, Sharon Mitchell, Kevin Rodriguez, and Brian Foster," he announced, reading from his screen. "By order of Pacific Airways corporate management, your employment has been terminated effective immediately. You are to surrender your employee badges, remove any company property, and exit the secure area of the airport." Jennifer's crying intensified as the reality of her situation fully sank in. 8 years of employment, gone in a matter of minutes because she had made assumptions about passengers based on their race. Sharon stared at Captain Morrison in stunned silence, unable to process how quickly her world had collapsed. Kevin attempted to maintain some dignity in the face of disaster. "Captain, I think there's been a misunderstanding. If I could just speak with someone in management." "Sir, there's no misunderstanding," Captain Morrison replied firmly. "These orders come directly from CEO David Chen. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings from the crew areas, and then you'll be escorted to the terminal exit." Brian Foster, who had been the most aggressive in his treatment of Victoria and Marcus, now found himself desperately trying to salvage his career. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Victoria with obvious desperation, "please, I have a family. I was just following what I thought were proper procedures. If I had known who you were—" Victoria's expression remained impassive. "The problem, Brian, is that you shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity. You discriminated against me and my son because you thought we were powerless to fight back." The other passengers in the gate area watched this dramatic reversal with fascination and discomfort. Many were recording the scene on their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something that would likely become a viral social media moment. The speed and decisiveness of the airline's response was unprecedented in most people's experience. Martha Henderson approached Victoria as the security team began escorting the terminated employees away. "My dear," she said quietly, "I had no idea who you were, but I want you to know that what I witnessed today was completely unacceptable regardless of your position or influence." Victoria turned to the older woman with genuine gratitude. "Mrs. Henderson, your willingness to speak up meant everything to me and my son. You didn't have to get involved, but you chose to do what was right." "I've seen too much discrimination in my lifetime to stay silent," Martha replied. "My late husband was in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. He taught me that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in it." Marcus had been watching the entire scene unfold with wide eyes and growing understanding. At 12, he was beginning to grasp the complex dynamics of power, race, and justice that had played out around him. "Mom," he said quietly, "why were they so mean to us if you own the airplane company?" Victoria knelt down to her son's level, choosing her words carefully. "They didn't know I owned the company, sweetheart. They were mean to us because of the color of our skin. They assumed that black people don't belong in first class, so they tried to make us prove we deserve to be there." "But that's stupid," Marcus said with the clear logic of childhood. "Anyone who buys a ticket should be able to sit wherever they paid to sit." "You're absolutely right," Victoria agreed, "and now we're going to make sure this never happens to other families." As the terminated employees were escorted away, a new flight crew was already being assembled in the airport's crew-ready room. Pacific Airways Operations Center had moved with remarkable speed to replace the dismissed personnel, pulling crew members from other flights and calling in reserves to ensure that Flight 447 could depart with minimal additional delay. The replacement crew was headed by senior flight attendant Lisa Chen, a 15-year veteran who had been hastily briefed on the situation by her supervisors. She had been told only that there had been a, quote, serious customer service incident requiring immediate crew replacement, and that she needed to ensure the affected passengers received exceptional service for the remainder of their journey. Lisa approached Victoria and Marcus with obvious nervousness, clearly aware that she was dealing with someone of significant importance but uncertain of the details. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, using Victoria's business name. "I'm Lisa Chen, your new lead flight attendant. On behalf of Pacific Airways, I want to sincerely apologize for whatever transpired here today." Victoria studied the new flight attendant's demeanor carefully. Lisa's approach was professional and respectful, but not obsequious. She seemed genuinely concerned about providing good service rather than merely managing a difficult situation. "Thank you, Lisa," Victoria replied. "I appreciate your professionalism. My son and I are looking forward to a pleasant flight to Miami." "Absolutely," Lisa assured her. "I've been instructed to ensure that you and your son receive our highest level of service. Is there anything specific you'd like me to arrange for your comfort during the flight?" Marcus looked up hopefully. "Do you have hot chocolate?" Lisa smiled warmly at the boy. "We certainly do. I'll make sure you get the best hot chocolate we've ever served on this route." As the new crew finished their preparations, Victoria noticed that word of the incident was already spreading through the airport. Several passengers from other flights had gathered near Gate B-24, drawn by the unusual sight of airline employees being escorted away by security. Social media posts were beginning to circulate, with hashtags like #AirlineDiscrimination and #JusticeServed trending in real time. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from David Chen. "Media inquiries already coming in. Our PR team is preparing a statement. Do you want to review it before release?" She typed back quickly, "Send it to my personal email. I want to ensure it addresses systemic issues, not just this incident." The rapid corporate response demonstrated the serious financial and reputational risks that discrimination posed to major companies in the social media age. Victoria knew that Pacific Airways was moving quickly not just because she owned the company, but because viral videos of discrimination could destroy brand value and trigger expensive boycotts. Meanwhile, in Pacific Airways' corporate headquarters in Seattle, an emergency meeting was already underway. David Chen had assembled his senior leadership team to address what they were calling the Denver incident. The company's legal department was reviewing policies, the human resources team was examining training programs, and the public relations staff was crafting damage control strategies. "How did this happen?" Chen asked his assembled executives. "We've had diversity training programs for years. We have policies explicitly prohibiting discrimination. How did 4 employees think it was acceptable to treat passengers this way?" The head of human resources, Patricia Williams, pulled up training records on her laptop. "The employees involved had all completed our standard customer service and diversity modules. But clearly, the training wasn't effective in preventing bias-based decision-making." "Then we need new training," Chen replied firmly. "I want a complete overhaul of our programs, developed by outside experts in unconscious bias and discrimination prevention. And I want every customer-facing employee to be retrained within 60 days. The legal department representative raised another concern. "We need to review all customer complaints from the past 2 years. If there's a pattern of discriminatory treatment, we could be facing federal civil rights investigations." Back at the gate, boarding for Flight 447 was finally resuming under the supervision of the new crew. The replacement gate agent, Maria Santos, processed Victoria and Marcus's boarding passes with professional efficiency and genuine courtesy. The stark contrast with their earlier treatment obvious to everyone watching. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Washington," Maria said, using the name on Victoria's ticket. "I hope you and your son have a wonderful flight to Miami." As they walked down the jet bridge, Marcus looked up at his mother with a mixture of pride and confusion. "Mom, why don't you just tell everyone you own the airline? Then they'd always be nice to us." Victoria considered her son's question carefully. "Marcus, the problem with that approach is that it doesn't help other people who don't own airlines. If people are only nice to us because of what I own, they'll still be mean to other black families. We need to change how people think, not just how they treat us." The interior of the aircraft had been thoroughly cleaned and prepared by the new crew. As Victoria and Marcus took their seats in 2A and 2B, Lisa Chen approached with 2 glasses of champagne and a special hot chocolate for Marcus, complete with whipped cream and a small cookie. "Mrs. Sterling," she said quietly, "I want you to know that the entire crew is committed to making the rest of your journey excellent. If there's anything at all you need, please don't hesitate to ask." Victoria appreciated the gesture while recognizing the complicated dynamics at play. The exceptional service she was now receiving was partly genuine hospitality and partly corporate damage control. But at least Marcus was finally experiencing the courtesy and respect that all first-class passengers should receive. As other passengers boarded the aircraft, many stared curiously at Victoria and Marcus, clearly aware that something significant had occurred. The elderly couple who had boarded earlier, the Thompsons, looked particularly uncomfortable as they realized they had witnessed discrimination and done nothing to intervene. Robert Thompson approached Victoria's seat hesitantly. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I saw what was happening at the gate, and I should have spoken up. There's no excuse for what those employees did to you and your son." Victoria nodded acknowledgement of his apology, while noting that it had taken the revelation of her power to prompt his recognition of the injustice. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I appreciate you saying that." Martha Henderson, who was seated several rows behind them, caught Victoria's eye and gave her an encouraging smile. The woman's earlier courage in speaking up had meant more to Victoria than all the apologies that followed her identity reveal. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Victoria reflected on the events of the past hour. The discrimination had been painful and harmful, particularly for Marcus, but it had also revealed important truths about her company and the broader airline industry. The swift corporate response demonstrated both the power of accountability and the unfortunate reality that such accountability often required wealth and influence to achieve. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez, We apologize for the extended delay in our departure this afternoon. We're now cleared for takeoff to Miami, where the weather is sunny and 82 degrees. Flight time today will be approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Victoria squeezed Marcus's hand. The worst part of their journey was over, but the most important part was just beginning. She had 8 minutes to fire everyone involved in their mistreatment, but it would take much longer to fix the systemic problems that had made such discrimination possible in the first place. 30 minutes into the flight to Miami, Victoria received an encrypted email on her phone that would reshape the entire airline industry's approach to discrimination. The message came from Dr. Angela Reeves, director of the Civil Rights Institute at Howard University, who had seen the viral videos from Denver International Airport and wanted to propose a collaboration that could transform how airlines train their employees. Miss Sterling, the email began, I've been following the incident at DIA through social media. While I'm sorry you and your son experienced such treatment, I believe this moment presents an unprecedented opportunity to create systematic change across the aviation industry. Would you be interested in partnering with our institute to develop a comprehensive anti-bias training program that could become the new industry standard? Victoria read the proposal with growing interest. Dr. Reeves outlined a research-based approach that would combine virtual reality scenarios, unconscious bias testing, and ongoing accountability measures to fundamentally change how airline employees interacted with passengers of all backgrounds. The program would be far more sophisticated than the basic diversity training that had clearly failed at Pacific Airways. Marcus was engrossed in a tablet game, occasionally sipping his hot chocolate and commenting on the clouds visible through the window. The trauma of the gate incident seemed to be fading as the excellent service from the new crew restored his excitement about the flight. Victoria was grateful for his resilience, but she knew they would need to have deeper conversations about racism and discrimination once they reached Miami. Lisa Chen approached their seats with a tablet displaying the lunch menu. Mrs. Sterling, we have several excellent options available today. Our chef's special is pan-seared salmon with quinoa and roasted vegetables, or we have a grass-fed beef tenderloin with truffle potatoes. The salmon sounds wonderful, Victoria replied. And Marcus, what would you like? Do you have mac and cheese? He asked hopefully. Lisa smiled. We can definitely prepare that for you. Would you like some fruit or vegetables on the side? As Lisa took their meal orders, Victoria's phone buzzed with another message, this one from her chief legal counsel, Robert Kim. Victoria, we need to discuss legal strategy. The fired employees are already consulting attorneys, and we're likely facing wrongful termination lawsuits despite the clear discrimination. How aggressive do you want to be in defending the company's actions? Victoria typed back quickly, schedule a call for tonight. We're not backing down, but I want to ensure we handle this correctly. Also, start researching partnership agreements with civil rights organizations for our new training programs. The speed at which events were unfolding demonstrated the modern realities of corporate crisis management. In previous decades, discrimination incidents might have been handled quietly through internal investigations and private settlements. But social media had made corporate accountability immediate and public, forcing companies to respond in real time. In the airline's operations center, David Chen was dealing with a cascade of challenges triggered by the Denver incident. 3 major corporate clients had already called to express concerns about their travel contracts. 2 civil rights organizations had announced they were monitoring Pacific Airways' response, and the Department of Transportation had initiated a preliminary inquiry into the company's passenger treatment policies. Sir, we have another problem, announced Sarah Mitchell, the airline's director of public relations. The video from Denver has been shared over 2 million times in the past hour. Hashtag Pacific Airways discrimination is trending nationwide, and we're getting thousands of comments from passengers sharing their own experiences of bias on our flights. Chen rubbed his temples, realizing that this incident was exposing problems far beyond the 4 employees who had been fired. How many similar complaints have we received in the past year? Sarah consulted her tablet. 47 formal complaints alleging racial discrimination, 31 involving allegations of religious bias, and dozens more describing what passengers felt was differential treatment based on their appearance or assumed economic status. The numbers were staggering and revealed a systemic problem that had been building for years. Chen recognized that his company had been failing to address discrimination complaints adequately, treating them as isolated incidents rather than symptoms of deeper cultural issues. Meanwhile, aboard the flight, Martha Henderson had moved to an empty seat near Victoria to continue their conversation from the gate. "My dear," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about what happened today. You have an opportunity to create change that goes far beyond your own airline." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "I've been getting messages from civil rights organizations and academic institutions wanting to partner on new training programs. This incident could become a catalyst for industry-wide reform." "That's exactly what needs to happen," Martha agreed. "My husband used to say that individual acts of courage only matter if they lead to institutional change. You have the platform and resources to ensure that what happened to you never happens to another family." Victoria appreciated the older woman's perspective and historical context. Martha's connection to the civil rights movement provided valuable insights into how discrimination could be systematically addressed rather than just individually punished. At Pacific Airways headquarters, an emergency board meeting was being convened via video conference. The company's board of directors, most of whom were learning about the incident for the first time, needed to understand the magnitude of the crisis and approve the aggressive response measures that Chen was proposing. Board member Elizabeth Warren, not the senator but a retired airline executive with the same name, raised immediate concerns about the financial implications. "David, terminating 4 employees immediately could expose us to significant legal liability. Are we certain this approach is legally sound?" Chen had anticipated this question. "Elizabeth, our legal team has reviewed the situation thoroughly. The employees' actions constituted clear violations of federal anti-discrimination laws and our own company policies. Keeping them employed would expose us to far greater liability from civil rights lawsuits." Another board member, former federal judge Harold Martinez, supported Chen's position. "The terminations were necessary and legally justified, but we need to go further. This incident suggests systemic problems in our training and corporate culture that require comprehensive reform." As the board discussion continued, Victoria was finalizing her response to Dr. Reeves' proposal. She had decided to commit $10 million of her personal funds to develop the most advanced anti-discrimination training program in the airline industry, with the goal of licensing it to other carriers and transportation companies. "Marcus," she said, turning to her son, "when we get to Miami, Mommy is going to be very busy working on some important projects. Do you understand why what happened today was so significant?" Marcus looked up from his tablet with the serious expression he wore when processing complex ideas. "Because if it happened to us, it probably happens to other people who can't fire everyone?" Victoria smiled at her son's astute understanding. "Exactly. And now we have a responsibility to use our position to help other families who might face the same treatment." "Can I help?" Marcus asked. "Maybe I could talk to other kids about what it felt like when those people were mean to us." The offer touched Victoria deeply. At 12, her son was already developing the social consciousness and desire to help others that she had tried to instill in him. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Your perspective could help adults understand how discrimination affects children." As the plane began its descent into Miami, Victoria reflected on how dramatically the day had changed her priorities. The vacation she had planned with Marcus would now include strategy sessions with civil rights leaders, meetings with training specialists, and the development of programs that could reshape how the airline industry treated passengers of all backgrounds. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Miami International Airport. Local time is 4:30 p.m., and the weather is sunny with a temperature of 84 degrees. We should be at the gate in approximately 20 minutes." Victoria looked out the window at the approaching city and realized that this flight had been a turning point not just for the 4 employees who lost their jobs, but for her entire approach to business leadership. She had always focused on profit and efficiency, but now she understood that her success brought obligations to use her power for social justice. The strategic response she was planning would go far beyond punishing individual acts of discrimination. She was about to launch a comprehensive campaign to transform an entire industry's culture, starting with her own airline and expanding to create new standards that would protect millions of passengers from the humiliation she and Marcus had endured. The real work was just beginning. The Miami International Airport terminal buzzed with activity as Flight 447 arrived at Gate C-12, but Victoria and Marcus were unaware that their arrival was being monitored by more than just Pacific Airways staff. Word of the Denver incident had reached the highest levels of the aviation industry, and several key figures were waiting to meet with Victoria as soon as she deplaned. As passengers began disembarking, Lisa Chen approached Victoria's seat one final time. "Mrs. Sterling, it's been an honor serving you and Marcus today. I want you to know that the entire crew is committed to the changes you're implementing across our airline." Victoria shook Lisa's hand warmly. "Thank you for your professionalism, Lisa. You and your crew demonstrated exactly the kind of service that all passengers deserve. I'll be recommending you for recognition in our next management review." Marcus gathered his belongings excitedly, already talking about the beach activities he hoped to enjoy during their Miami vacation. The resilience of youth had allowed him to recover from the morning's trauma, though Victoria knew the lessons learned would stay with him forever. As they walked through the jet bridge, Victoria was surprised to see Thomas Rodriguez, the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, waiting in the gate area, along with several other officials. She recognized him from industry conferences and realized that the Denver incident had attracted federal attention with unprecedented speed. "Ms. Sterling," Administrator Rodriguez said, extending his hand. "I apologize for interrupting your vacation, but I felt it was important to speak with you personally about today's events. What happened in Denver represents exactly the kind of systemic discrimination that the transportation industry must address aggressively." Victoria appreciated the high-level attention while recognizing the political dynamics at play. Federal officials were eager to be seen taking swift action on civil rights issues, especially when they involved prominent business leaders. "Administrator Rodriguez, I'm glad the FAA is taking this seriously. We need industry-wide standards to prevent these incidents." "Absolutely," Rodriguez agreed. "I'd like to propose a meeting next week with representatives from all major airlines to discuss mandatory anti-discrimination training standards. Your experience and expertise would be invaluable in developing these protocols." Marcus tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, are all these people here because of what happened on the airplane?" "Yes, sweetheart," Victoria replied. "Sometimes when something bad happens, it creates opportunities to make things better for everyone." Meanwhile, in Denver, the 4 terminated employees were discovering the broader consequences of their actions. Jennifer Mills had already received calls from 3 airlines declining her applications for new positions, as word of her termination had spread rapidly through industry networks. The aviation community was small, and discrimination incidents were now tracked and shared among human resources departments. Brian Foster was meeting with an employment attorney, hoping to challenge his termination on procedural grounds. However, his lawyer was reviewing the extensive documentation of discriminatory behavior and explaining that Pacific Airways had strong legal justification for immediate dismissal. "Mr. Foster," the attorney said, "your former employer has video evidence, witness statements, and a clear paper trail showing violations of federal civil rights laws. Pursuing wrongful termination litigation would be expensive and likely unsuccessful." Sharon Mitchell was facing personal consequences beyond unemployment. Her daughter, a college student studying social work, had seen the viral videos and was struggling to reconcile her mother's actions with the values she had been taught growing up. "Mom, how could you treat a family that way?" her daughter asked during a tearful phone conversation. "Everything you taught me about treating people fairly, how do I explain this to my friends?" Kevin Rodriguez was perhaps facing the most severe consequences, as his management position meant he bore responsibility not just for his own actions but for failing to correct his subordinates' discriminatory behavior. His termination letter specifically cited his duty as a supervisor to protect passengers from bias-based treatment. Back in Miami, Victoria's phone was ringing constantly, with calls from reporters, civil rights organizations, and business leaders wanting to discuss the incident and its implications. She had asked her assistant to screen calls while she focused on the strategic opportunities emerging from the crisis. Dr. Angela Reeves had flown to Miami to meet with Victoria in person, bringing detailed proposals for the anti-discrimination training program they had discussed. The 2 women met in Victoria's hotel suite, while Marcus enjoyed the pool with a hired babysitter. "Miss Sterling," Dr. Reeves began, "I've been studying discrimination in transportation for 15 years, and I believe this moment represents a unique opportunity for systemic change. Your willingness to invest in comprehensive reform could transform not just airlines but trains, buses, and other transportation modes." Victoria reviewed the research proposals with keen interest. The program Dr. Reeves outlined would combine cutting-edge psychology research with practical training scenarios, using virtual reality to place employees in situations where they might unconsciously exhibit bias. I want to fund a 5-year study, Victoria decided. $10 million to develop, test, and implement the most effective anti-discrimination training in the transportation industry. But I have one condition. The results must be shared freely with all carriers, not just Pacific Airways. Dr. Reeves nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly the approach needed for industry-wide impact. We'll create open-source training materials that any company can use and adapt. Meanwhile, Pacific Airways' stock price was experiencing unprecedented volatility as investors tried to assess the long-term implications of the discrimination incident. Initially, shares had dropped 8% as traders worried about legal liability and reputation damage. However, by the end of the trading day, the stock had recovered and actually gained 3% as analysts recognized that the company's aggressive response demonstrated strong leadership and commitment to reform. Financial markets were increasingly factoring corporate social responsibility into valuations, and Victoria's swift action had actually enhanced investor confidence rather than undermining it. The message was clear. Companies that addressed discrimination decisively were better long-term investments than those that ignored or minimized such problems. In Pacific Airways headquarters, David Chen was implementing the most comprehensive policy overhaul in the airline's history. Every customer service protocol was being reviewed, complaint handling procedures were being strengthened, and employee accountability measures were being enhanced. I want monthly reports on passenger complaints, with specific attention to any patterns suggesting discriminatory treatment, Chen instructed his management team. We're also implementing a passenger advocacy office with direct reporting to my office, so issues can be escalated immediately. The company was also establishing a $5 million fund to compensate passengers who had experienced discrimination on Pacific Airways flights, with an independent review board to evaluate claims and award appropriate remedies. As evening approached in Miami, Victoria and Marcus sat on their hotel balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay. The events of the day had been exhausting and traumatic, but also transformative in ways that were still becoming clear. "Mom," Marcus said thoughtfully, "I'm glad you're the boss of the airplane company. Now other kids won't have to feel scared like I did today." Victoria pulled her son closer, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with her power and resources. "That's right, sweetheart. We're going to make sure every family feels welcome when they travel." The immediate crisis was resolving, but Victoria knew the real work was just beginning. She had committed to spending the next several years transforming not just her own company, but an entire industry's approach to civil rights and passenger treatment. The discrimination she and Marcus had endured would become the catalyst for changes that protected millions of travelers, ensuring that no other family would face the humiliation they had experienced. Justice had been swift for the 4 employees who lost their jobs, but lasting justice would require the systemic reforms Victoria was now determined to implement. The sun set over Miami as mother and son planned not just their vacation activities, but the beginning of a movement that would reshape how America traveled. 6 months after the Denver incident, Victoria Sterling stood before a packed auditorium at the International Transportation Summit in Washington, D.C., delivering a keynote address that would fundamentally reshape how the global aviation industry approached passenger rights and discrimination prevention. The transformation that had begun with 8 minutes of phone calls had evolved into a comprehensive revolution affecting millions of travelers worldwide. "When my son Marcus and I boarded Pacific Airways Flight 447 6 months ago," Victoria began, her voice carrying to the back of the auditorium filled with airline executives, government officials, and civil rights leaders. "We were just a mother and son looking forward to a vacation. We had no idea that our experience would expose systemic problems that had been hiding in plain sight throughout the aviation industry." The audience listened intently as Victoria recounted not just the discrimination they had faced, but the comprehensive response that had followed. The Sterling Institute for Transportation Equity, founded with her $10 million commitment, had already trained over 5,000 airline employees across 12 different carriers, using revolutionary virtual reality scenarios that challenged unconscious bias in real time. Marcus, now 13 and sitting in the front row, watched his mother with obvious pride. The shy boy who had been confused and hurt by the gate agent's treatment had evolved into a confident young advocate who regularly spoke at youth conferences about standing up to discrimination. His perspective as a child who had experienced bias firsthand had proven invaluable in developing training materials that helped adults understand the lasting impact of their actions. Dr. Angela Reeves, now director of the Sterling Institute, presented research findings that had shocked the transportation industry. Our comprehensive study of passenger treatment across 50 airports revealed that Black passengers were 340% more likely to be questioned about their tickets, 280% more likely to be asked for additional identification, and 450% more likely to be suggested alternative seating arrangements, she reported. The data had provided irrefutable evidence of systemic discrimination that many airlines had previously dismissed as isolated incidents. More importantly, the Institute's intervention programs had demonstrated measurable improvements in passenger treatment across all participating carriers. Pacific Airways had become the flagship example of successful transformation. Under David Chen's leadership and Victoria's oversight, the airline had achieved a 95% reduction in discrimination complaints while actually improving customer satisfaction scores across all demographic groups. The company's stock price had reached an all-time high as investors recognized that inclusive practices were not just morally correct, but financially advantageous. Our employees now understand that excellent customer service means treating every passenger with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, accent, or perceived economic status, Chen explained during a panel discussion. This isn't just about avoiding discrimination lawsuits, it's about building a corporate culture that attracts the best employees and serves all customers effectively. The success at Pacific Airways had attracted attention from transportation companies worldwide. British Airways had licensed the Sterling Institute's training program for their international routes. Singapore Airlines had implemented similar bias prevention protocols across their entire network. Even ground transportation companies like Greyhound and Amtrak were adapting the methodologies for their specific operating environments. Martha Henderson, the elderly woman who had spoken up during the Denver incident, had become an unexpected advocate for passenger rights. At 76, she was traveling the country speaking at senior centers about the importance of intervening when witnessing discrimination. Her message was simple but powerful. Silence in the face of injustice makes everyone complicit. I've been flying for 60 years, Martha told audiences, and I've seen too many people treated unfairly because others were afraid to speak up. If you see something wrong happening, you have a moral obligation to act. The 4 employees terminated after the Denver incident had experienced varying degrees of consequences and redemption. Jennifer Mills had enrolled in a comprehensive bias training program and was working as a customer service representative for a local hotel chain, applying lessons learned from her termination to ensure better treatment for all guests. Brian Foster had struggled more with accountability, initially pursuing legal action against Pacific Airways before eventually recognizing that his behavior had been indefensible. He had relocated to another state and was working in a non-customer-facing role while undergoing counseling to address his unconscious biases. Sharon Mitchell had used her termination as a wake-up call, returning to college to study social work with a focus on racial equity. Her daughter, initially ashamed of her mother's actions, had become proud of her mother's commitment to personal growth and change. Kevin Rodriguez had faced the most severe career consequences due to his supervisory role, but had channeled his experience into consulting work helping other companies identify and address discriminatory practices in their customer service operations. The legal landscape had also evolved significantly. The Department of Transportation had established new mandatory reporting requirements for passenger complaints involving potential discrimination. Airlines were now required to track, investigate, and publicly report statistics on passenger treatment disparities, creating transparency that encouraged proactive reform. Federal legislation known as the Passenger Dignity Act had been introduced in Congress, with bipartisan support driven partly by the publicity surrounding Victoria's experience. The bill would establish national standards for passenger treatment and create federal penalties for transportation companies that failed to address systemic discrimination. Victoria's influence extended beyond airlines into other sectors of her business empire. Sterling Global Logistics had implemented similar bias prevention training for all employees interacting with clients and vendors. The company's commitment to inclusive practices had actually enhanced its reputation and attracted new customers who valued working with socially responsible organizations. The ripple effects reached into Victoria's personal life as well. Marcus had been accepted into Stanford University's early admission program, planning to study both business and social justice with the goal of continuing his mother's work in corporate accountability. His essay about experiencing discrimination had moved admissions officers and demonstrated maturity far beyond his years. "I learned that having power means having responsibility," Marcus had written. "My mother could have used her position to just get us better treatment, but instead she used it to make sure other families wouldn't face what we faced. That's the kind of leader I want to become." Victoria's relationship with Martha Henderson had evolved into a deep friendship, with the older woman becoming a surrogate grandmother to Marcus and a trusted advisor on Victoria's expanding social justice initiatives. Martha's historical perspective on civil rights struggles provided valuable context for contemporary advocacy efforts. The Sterling Foundation had expanded its mission beyond education and entrepreneurship to include transportation equity initiatives. The foundation was funding legal aid programs to help passengers pursue discrimination claims, supporting research into bias in artificial intelligence systems used by transportation companies, and developing educational materials for schools about passenger rights and civil treatment. Technology companies were beginning to incorporate bias detection algorithms into customer service platforms, using machine learning to identify potentially discriminatory interactions in real time. Victoria had invested in several of these startups, recognizing that technological solutions could supplement human training to create more equitable treatment systems. The global impact was becoming evident as well. The European Union had adopted passenger protection standards based partly on the Sterling Institute's research. Asian airlines were implementing similar training programs, and transportation ministers from several African nations had requested consultations about developing bias prevention protocols suited to their specific cultural contexts. Victoria's speaking engagements now commanded six-figure fees, but she donated all proceeds to civil rights organizations and transportation equity initiatives. Her book, 8 Minutes to Justice: How One Phone Call Changed an Industry, had become a bestseller, with proceeds funding scholarships for students from underrepresented communities studying transportation management. The Denver International Airport had installed a permanent exhibit about passenger rights and the importance of treating all travelers with dignity. The display featured Marcus's artwork and essays about his experience, helping children understand both the reality of discrimination and their power to resist it. As Victoria concluded her keynote address at the Transportation Summit, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that morning in Denver. What had begun as personal humiliation had evolved into a mission that was reshaping an entire industry and creating lasting protections for millions of travelers. "Change doesn't happen through silence," she told the audience. "It happens when people with power use that power responsibly, when bystanders choose to speak up rather than look away, and when we recognize that treating everyone with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business." The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, but Victoria's mind was already moving to the next challenge. The transformation of aviation was well underway, but there were other industries where discrimination persisted, other injustices that required attention, other opportunities to use her platform for meaningful change. Marcus joined her on stage as the applause continued, and Victoria put her arm around her son's shoulders. The boy who had been hurt by discrimination had become a young man committed to preventing others from experiencing the same pain. Together, they represented not just the resolution of one incident of injustice, but the beginning of a generational commitment to equality and human dignity. The 8 minutes that had changed their lives had become the foundation for changes that would protect travelers for generations to come. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the simplest decision, the choice to stand up for what's right, regardless of the personal cost or complexity of the challenge ahead. As mother and son left the stage together, they were already planning their next flight, not as victims of discrimination, but as advocates for a transportation system that welcomed everyone with dignity and respect. The journey that had begun with humiliation in Denver was now a mission that spanned continents and promised to reshape how the world traveled. Their story had become proof that individual courage, combined with institutional power and unwavering commitment to justice, could create changes that outlasted any single incident and protected countless future travelers from experiencing the discrimination they had endured. The legacy of Flight 447 would be measured not in the careers that ended that day, but in the lives protected and dignity preserved for generations of passengers yet to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.